Thanks very much, Brian, for joining me on this episode of The Honest Conversation. I appreciate you making time during the Christmas week to speak to me. Either I must be a very good friend, or you must be that bored of family that you are dying to get away from from them in order to speak to me.
Yeah, happy to be here, man.
Good. So, look, for those that don't, for those listeners, I say that as if there are loads of listeners. For those that aren't perhaps familiar with yourself, could you give us maybe an elevator picture of who you are, your background, and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Been in the analytics space for about 2 decades. Have done every role in software sales from BDR upwards to SVP of Global Sales, which is where I'm at now. Have done anything there in between. Married 20 years, 3 kids, reside in Cincinnati, Ohio, here in the States, but travel extensively across U.S. As well as Europe. Born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, and then moved to Cincinnati years ago. We were going to spend 2 years here, and it's been about 16. So something must be working here in Cincinnati, even though we have about a foot of snow on the ground right now. Even with that, we still enjoy everything here. But no, so far, that's kind of a highlight of me, I think.
So yeah, of course, a couple of things there. I know there's a massive snowstorm, or there was a massive snowstorm. You Americans, you always get the white Christmases. Or the ice Christmases, depending on where you are.
Yeah, true. Very true.
Well, I don't know what the UK would do with a foot of snow. I think with everyone would just sit at home and do nothing. It would be like lockdown again.
Yeah. Good point.
So, yeah, thanks for that introduction. I appreciate that. Obviously, we do know each other. Somehow we've worked together for a little while now. Don't ask me how that started. That seems almost like 10 years ago, but it's actually only been, I think I counted it was about 14 months now. So look at that.
Yeah.
Budding friendship.
All right.
So, just do a few minutes about you. Got some questions that we ask all of our guests. Nothing too heavy, I promise. You mentioned that you've been in software sales, particularly the analytics space, for the last 20 years? Nearly 20 years now.
Yeah.
So I'm sure when you were a kid, you didn't think, do you know what, I want to be analytics based and doing software sales when you were 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. No, what was the dream for Brian?
I hate to say it, but I'll tell you what my dream was. As a very young kid, my dream was to be a trash truck driver. As a kid, I don't know. I loved watching the people, jump off the back of the truck, throw out the garbage, the trash, the roughage, whatever, and then hop back on the truck and carry on. For me, that's what I wanted to do. My dad, for years, made fun of me for it. Because definitely a far thing from that right now. That's for sure. But that was very, very early, young age. That was my dream. That evolved into a sports player, and we all have our dreams, right? But yeah. That's really what it was. I hate to say it, but that was the case. So
that's insane. And I've heard everything. Astronaut. I've heard someone wanted to be an accountant before. Don't ask me about that one. But a truck driver. Okay. Yeah. Wow. That's definitely taken me by surprise. I won't lie. Yeah. I can see it though. Yeah. No. It's that's interesting. What would you say? What was the job that led to you going into software sales? What did you do before your first job at Information Builders?
Yeah, that's fair. So I worked for Anheuser-Busch actually in university and college, and I worked various roles at Anheuser-Busch for about 3 or 4 years. Some of the roles towards the end there for me was sales as well there. But For me, I also then graduated with a degree in computer science. And I did that role for a little bit at Anheuser-Busch and quickly realized I could not be behind a desk doing the same thing from a coding perspective all day, every day. So I like the sales part and I like the tech part. And I recognized that there was an industry out there that could combine those two things into tech sales. And through various efforts, found my way into a BDR role, and then began to kind of hone my craft, and then begin to kind of move up there in the tech sales space. So
Good. Okay. And if you had a favorite quote or a life motto, what would you say that is? If you have one at all.
there's several of those. I think.
Oh, great! One for each day of the week.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know if there's that many. I just think what we were just talking about, kind of being in tech sales for 20 years and moving through various companies, moving through various roles. I think there's mistakes made by some individuals in going to that next role. And one of my things that I try to live by is that the next role, you should really only know how to do 50% of that role. The other 50% should be something that you're willing to learn and become the best at the other 50 in the first 6 months of that new role. Right. So that's something that I always kind of think about, as stretching yourself a little bit. And if you don't stretch yourself like that, it's just not going to work.
That's interesting. Oh, I remember that when you reject a candidate of mine that doesn't. He's willing to. No, I ain't joking. These podcasts are brilliant when it comes to giving you guys feedback.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I'm watching every word right now. Look at what I said.
No, but I think that's a really fair point. Yeah, I think that was a quote went around a few years ago on LinkedIn about, and particularly talking about understanding, if you don't know the job and someone offers it, take it and learn on the job. You have to start somewhere at the end of the day. If you know 50% of it, I think at the end of the day, people don't move or they don't move upwards with all that knowledge, and for someone that's had a career like yourself, I'm sure there's been plenty of times you sat there and gone, so what do I do now?
Yeah, fair.
So the last question is a bit of a fun one. Do you have a guilty pleasure song?
Oh boy, that's a great question. My wife says that I have several addictions. One of those of which is working. So that's what I do is probably one of my most healthiest addictions, is working, and building companies, which I'd have to agree with her, is relatively healthy. Maybe, I don't know. Some days. I don't really have anything.
What's the one song that gets you going?
What do you mean?
Okay, so for example, and this is going to really put me in the spotlight with a lot of people. My guilty pleasure song is Celine Dion. I'm not going to say which song, but
okay.
it's like an artist that I listen on the down low. When I'm driving on the country roads, I listen to it and I'm singing it out, on long trips. But as soon as I get into the city, out comes Dr. Dre, Eminem. It's completely different. But what's your guilty pleasure song that just, if anyone knew about, for our sakes, people that are listening, what would they?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I have a wide diverse in music, that's for sure. Ariana Grande, actually, there's a couple of her songs that I really enjoy that I would never, want to publicly play with other folks in the vehicle with me. There's a couple there, but then I go, all the way into, 1980s R&B rap, and then Eminem, of course. Yeah. I've got a wide selection.
Ariana Grande. Well, I know I'm doing it the next meal we have.
Yeah, exactly. So,
No, that's good. That's good to know. See, you never know about these sort of things unless you ask.
yeah,
Okay,
sure.
brilliant. So look, just going into your background and who you are, for you've already sort of touched on it. You were information builders for a number of years, became an AE, then you sort of went into leadership, and you sort of, if you look at your background, you dabbled in the leadership, but then you've always sort of, in the bigger organizations, perhaps come in as an AE. Is that something that you like to do? Is that well, why do you do that? There's a lot of leaders that I speak to, and you probably know this as well, where if they're a VP of a region, the only thing that they'll move to is either a better financial, or a better company. They'll never become an AE and then move up. So what's the reason behind you sort of doing that, or is it just as it happens to be that's just the route it's taken?
Generally, I would say I'm always coming in as, it was at least in the last 3, 6, 9, at least in the last 8 to 9 years, have always come in as a leader. I will say though, there are some situations and times where you are coming in as a consultant, sometimes from the VC side, right? And you're coming in as a kind of an independent third party for a little bit of a time to figure out what's really going on in this organization first, right? Before that next step is kind of either offered or it just makes sense from a timing perspective, right? So a lot of times those things happen as well, before you join an organization as a leader. Or it happens while you're in the organization too, sometimes as well. So,
Yes. So how many IPOs or acquisitions have you been a part of now? What's your number?
so I've been through two successful exits at this point. And one, I would say, and then a third one, which was also, there has not been an exit per se, but at least from a value of shares perspective on the open market, it was very successful. So.
Good. So I mean, you obviously Workfront, ThoughtSpot. You landed yourself at Pyramid Analytics. They're a business who I know very well, but they're a business that's been around for a very long time. I'm sure when you joined 2 years ago, I know when I came across them, they weren't, we'll call it a sexy startup unicorn status that so many people like ThoughtSpot, like Starburst, like some of these others, like a Snowflake, for example. What was the allure from your perspective in joining that organization, Pyramid as a business?
Yeah, and that's a fair ask. I knew these guys. I knew Pyramid as a company. I knew the leadership for about 4 or 5 years before I joined Pyramid. So I knew what they were building. I knew they had a first generation product that they sunsetted while they were building their second one, and now we're taking that second one to market for really kind of the first time at global scale. For me, obviously the tech, I enjoy working for organizations that are based out of Tel Aviv. This is, a couple times I have done that. I thoroughly enjoy the tech, the landscape, the personalities, the culture that comes with that into corporate life, if you will. The analytics space, I knew very well, and I knew the platform that was being built was a differentiated platform. I already knew the buyers as well on the analytics side, and I knew what they were looking for and the gaps that they had and how the Pyramid platform could fill those gaps. And I recognized that the company was at a stage where they were building, right? And I love to build. I'm not a scaler. That's just not me. I love early stage companies that are, Series A, Series B, type companies that are trying to figure out, how do we take this product to market, and how are we successful, right? I hate walking into an organization and they say, hey, we have everything figured out. Here's our playbook. You go do these 5, 6 things and poof, you'll have success. I hate that. It's just not me. I get really bored really fast. And, those sort of organizations, last acquisition, last exit was we got purchased by Adobe. I left immediately, right? Like it's just not what I enjoy to do. Now, other people, hey, that's what they enjoy to do. That's fine, right? But for me, I just, I love being sub 50, sub 75 employee count coming in, and then trying to figure that out over the next couple of years. It's just truly, that's my addiction, man. I'll tell you. So.
I mean, in that time, there was a lot of businesses or vendors that were starting up, around the analytics place, and some, depending on who you would say, Pyramid's gone through, their release in 2018 was really the catalyst for where they are now as an organization, right? What was it about the tech and the leadership that set them apart from, I don't know, say another vendor in the space, another startup that, I think we've spoken about Telius, for example. They were primed for that sort of position as well. And there are the vendors that I'm not even going to go into because some of them are very big. But what made you see them particularly? Why them on their leadership? Why them on their tech?
Yeah, sure. When you take a product to market for the first time, right? You'll take a watered down product. Oftentimes, right? There's been several startups that I've been at where my first 3 or 4 months, I didn't have a product yet. I had a PowerPoint deck that said, "Here's what the product's going to be," right? And you build 10% of your overall vision, right? You sell that, and then you hope to get more funding and more money to build out the rest of the product. But oftentimes, that doesn't happen, right? What Pyramid did differently is they said, you know what? We're not going to sell anything for a couple of years. We're going to build and spend money and build what the customer needs to its fullest capability possible, right? And then we're going to take that entire platform to market. And what that gives you, right, is it gives you a higher level of customer satisfaction, right? You're not selling a pipe dream. You're not selling futures. You don't have to go through this roadmap with this big caution of, this may not happen, right? Because for all these various reasons, all of those sort of things, you don't have to worry about and skate around, if you will, with the customer. Now, granted, I'll tell you, it's much more expensive to do it that way, right? Than telling the VCs, give me some money, I'll go get some revenue for you, right? But on the customer satisfaction side, it's great, right? To actually do it that way.
Yeah, so that definitely is a different model, especially in the last 5 to 8 years, maybe 10 years. The VC world has been a grow. We'll outgrow it. We'll outgrow the pains. Get to 100 million ARR. Go on the stock exchange, New York, London, wherever it is. And Pyramid have gone completely the other way around. And in a way, actually, it's probably worked best for you doing that with the way the market is now. In 2022, you had one of the largest VC funding rounds of over 120 million. That this year, particularly any other year, that'd probably be one of the smallest. But this year, that's one of the biggest going. So I can see the benefits of that. A couple of other things that I was going to just drill down on there whilst you've got that. You mentioned you like working for Tel Aviv or Israeli-based startups. Israel has born some of the biggest startups over the last 5 years. It doesn't look like it's going to be slowing down anytime soon. What do you think their secret sauce is?
I think there's a lot of different variables to that. I don't know if there's really one thing. There's a great book to read too. Uh, gosh, Startup Nation is the name of the book.
Yeah.
And on Tel Aviv, and it's all about how the tech scene has evolved, how the military had a presence into building the tech scene, especially from a security perspective, right? The amount of security tech that you have coming from Tel Aviv is just unprecedented, right? It's the strong tech. It's also kind of the no BS attitude as well around, look, if there's a problem, we need to fix it, right? And it's openly talked about. There's no secrets, there's no rumors. Therefore, I think the culture is generally going to be a stronger culture inside of the company when you have that sort of a attitude
Yeah.
of people, I think.
Okay, no, that's good. And you mentioned the VC side of things. We'll come on to that in a bit. But how have you found? Is this the first organisation that you've sort of directly been dealing with from a VC side, or do you have previous experience with that?
I mean,
If so, what's been different in previous
um,
organisations to this organisation?
um, I would say the board is entirely out of Tel Aviv, right?
Okay.
We do have. I take that back. We do have two now that are in the U.S. But for the majority of it, it's been Tel Aviv led. There's kind of maybe one kind of downside is that the Tel Aviv economy, a good portion of that is IT services that are offshored, right? And those are usually generally the things that are kind of cut first during an economic downturn, right? So sometimes those sort of things are seen first when you're living in Tel Aviv. That may not represent the rest of the world, but that does happen. That's for sure. But I think the other interesting thing here is that for 12 years we've had the same founders, right? And they've gone through multiple iterations of first generation product and now the second generation of Pyramid. That often does not happen. Oftentimes there's switches, changes made for various reasons, right? And that has not happened here. And I think that's also just a testament kind of to our leaders as well at the company to be able to go through that, have the vision, the foresight to do that. So.
No, I appreciate that. I think that's an interesting insight into perhaps where boards maybe are right now, given the number of issues and stability, depending on what where you sit on the fence on, or where you sit in terms of the economic climate currently. I mean, how are you finding the economic climate for customer deals? I think you were actually just saying that Q4's brilliant. What one of the best?
No, it's been good. Yeah, it's been good. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some cautious signs here or there from budget perspectives, but generally it doesn't feel like a 2008, 2009 by any stretch of the imagination. Globally, it's globally consistent. Globally consistent, I would say. But there is definitely caution in every one of our sales geos, the DACH territory, the UKI, and then also North America. There's a little bit of caution everywhere, but it's pretty minimal to the overall larger picture, I think.
Okay, good. No, that's quite interesting. All right, let's move on to you per se now. Your experience moving away from Pyramid. What would you say? What would you say your biggest challenge is right now as an SVP, and how are you overcoming that as a leader?
The biggest challenge, it's 9 months ago. Gosh, finding talent, Luke, and the talent market was, as you know, just crazy, right? You'd have to go from a candidate that was field level candidate from hello to sign here within generally less than 2 weeks, because as you know, they were getting 2, 3, 4, 5 offers, right? And all those offers were extremely competitive, and all those offers were also growing in terms of what the market generally brought, right? So that was extremely hard, right, at the time, and it's becoming a little bit easier, I would say. Everything's kind of calmed down in the market from a hiring perspective. I think where we're at right now as an organization is that we are, maniacally focused on new logos, right? And understanding our ICP of the customer, because it's changed for us a little bit over the last 12 months, for sure, for the better for us. And then at the same time, then the ICP of not just our customers, our partners, as well as our employees that we want to bring in. And then making sure that all of my sales managers are bringing in the right profile of candidate that we are looking for to grow the business, right? And to do it in a productivity model where the math works out and we're not having to do something crazy because we're not following math in a year from now or 2 years where we weren't following math and we have to do a massive layoff, right? So all those things are kind of taken into consideration right now, and getting that right, is critical for us for success for the future.
Could you shed maybe some light into that? How do you go about making sure the math works out so you're not having to engage in multiple layoffs? And also you mentioned about new logos. A lot of organizations are not focusing on new logos, but existing logos they have. Why are you going against, say, the grain per se on that one against, say, some of your peers?
Yeah, first of all, we definitely have a strategy to grow our existing customer base. There's no question about that. But realize that our platform is one that has an ROI of saving the company money, saving our customer money. Mm-hmm. So for that, we are extremely attractive to new customers right now who are, of course, tightening their spend because of the economic climate. And we offer them a very compelling ROI or a very short payback window when they purchase Pyramid with how they're currently doing analytics today. So,
yeah, I think that's if it's compelling enough and you're a necessity, not a nice to have, there will never not be a time when your platform's not needed. And I've seen the platform firsthand. It does some really interesting things. So I think you mentioned talent being one of the hardest things. How obviously we have an existing relationship, so I know that you use a really great, handsome recruiter who's got a great network. And just no, actually, I'm joking.
I didn't know if you met him, Luke, but that's great you met him. That's fantastic. I know you did. That's good.
Who's Richard? I'm confused. This is not unlike you. No, you're the only person I know whose network does not rival my own. Out of nowhere. But when we first started working together, you were managing. You had multiple reports. Over the last year, I think I might have placed 2, 3, 4, maybe 4 or 5 of your leaders into their positions. What would you say? You've been that first-time leader or that first-line manager. How do you coach your leaders to make sure that they're getting the right talent? Because from my own experience over the years of consulting with C-suite or that, a lot of hiring managers are terrible at interviewing and are terrible at hiring. They don't know, and we've spoken about this, multiple times. So I really want to drill down on this from a second, third line leader. How do you make sure your first line leaders or your sales managers are not making those mistakes?
Yeah, it's definitely, you have to have conversations around what we want the candidates to be in their first 90 days, right? What activities do we want to see from them? What behaviors should they be demonstrating? And then how do we find those things out during the interview process, right? I'll give you an example. We're looking for people that are curious individuals, right? Well, what do we do then to see if they are curious? For me, on a first interview, if I'm interviewing that person, I'm not asking them any questions at all. I want them to find out stuff about us for them to be able to make a determination of, are we a good fit for them, right? Likewise, we are a platform. We're not SaaS, right? We're a massive platform that does all kinds of things, all kinds of use cases for any type of person in a company, in any sort of company, in any sort of vertical, right? How we figure out if we're a right fit is by being curious, is by figuring out what's their current state, what's their desired future state, and how can Pyramid play a part in that pathway from a current state to desired future state. And if they're not curious individuals, they're not going to be successful in their first 90 days or longer at Pyramid, right? So that's just one small example, right?
Okay, well, let's drill down on that now, and I'll put my recruiter hat on for a second. Right, so you're looking for curiosity. Now that's something that generally isn't taught. You either have that. It's like work ethic. I find you either have that or you don't have that. It's not something you can ask. But if you do, if you are, and I know we've had conversations, for example, where candidates haven't been curious in that first stage. We then give them that feedback, and in the second stage, they'll just ask maybe 4 or 5 questions, and that to them will be curious.
Mm-hmm.
What do how do you make sure that your VPs, for example, below you are tracking that? Do you have a scorecard? Do you give them role plays? How do you train someone that has maybe never led before or never had high level?
You can't train. You can't train or teach that generally. It's like the work ethic. Either you have it or you don't, right? The drive, either you have it or you don't. Now, some things may change in that person's life for them to get that, but oftentimes the change that happens is not something that, another human coached another human on, right? Something happened traumatic in their life, and then a switch was hit, and then that changes it, right? So from that, but there's just things that we look for when you're interviewing for a sales role or anywhere in the go-to-market role. You should be demonstrating, or you should see things about that candidate that they're also going to be doing those things when they're in the job and they're actively driving deals and pipeline and conversations, right? I'll give you an example. We had a BDR that interviewed here with us, right? Interviewed, I don't know, processed maybe 3 or 4 people over the course of 2 weeks. That BDR reached out to 9 other people in our company to inquire about the company and the product and the people. Great skill.
Yeah, that's something you don't find. Just out of curiosity, was it one of those?
I can't remember, actually. I can't remember.
Okay.
I don't know. Sorry.
There's absolutely no need to ask that, but it just
I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe it was.
Here's the SVP of Pyramid saying we find great SDRs.
I don't know, but that is I get so on my profile, right? I am hiring, right? I get so few people though that reach out to me. So few, you know. It's just surprises.
It's an art, that, isn't it? I've just gone through a hiring process myself, and we pay very well in a recruitment world. And I had a job advertised, everything that you need to know, and I had one person. I had two people reach out to me, but one person actually picked up the phone. And it is a dying, picking up the phone and cold calling someone who could potentially be your boss. Do you think there's an inherent maybe laziness with the job application process for salespeople? Maybe there's it's recruiters or what, or just that they are in such demand they don't need to. But what's your thought process around that?
Look, my top AE here for a period of time was an AE that reached out to me cold. He produced a fair amount of new business for us at new logos. He reached out to me like he would be reaching out to a prospect. Demonstrated that and brought him on, and he showed that same behavior in the job too. So
I think you've alluded a couple of times now from a candidate's perspective is to treat that interview process and hiring manager and organization like a client, like you would. I mean, one of the things that we do as a business is when we talk about using the medic methodology in the interview process. It's quite an interesting concept, really. But from the interviewer, so from the hiring manager perspective, what say top tips would you give or top tricks would you give for, say, a hiring manager who is listening to this and they've got to go and hire their first enterprise AE or their first AE? What sort of tips would you give them?
So did the interviewee, did he look at your profile before the interview? Right?
Okay.
Did he come to the interview, or did he come to the interview and ask, hey, where do you live? Like, horrible question to be asking, because that person needs to be doing research on who you are, because this person is going to be working for this person, right? If he's not doing that, then that person is not doing that from a first call perspective with a potential buyer or a prospect, right? As the hiring manager, do you go and do you also look at the profile of the individual? Yes. What do you look for in that profile, right? For us, we have a certain type of company that we look for that has to be in their profile. We look at their activity as an individual over the last 90 days and what are they doing on LinkedIn? How many recommendations do they have not by coworkers, but by the buyers on their actual profile? And these are all for individual contributors, right? Those sort of things you have to look for to find out. If someone has IBM, SAP, and Oracle on their profile, they're generally not going to be successful at a startup, especially at a place like Pyramid.
Okay, that's interesting, and that's quite a big line in the sand. And actually, I agree with you. I get worried when I see startups employing people from IBM, SAP, and Oracle. This is no offense to anybody who's perhaps listening to this or watching this. There is a time and place for them types of organizations, but in a business, but you're not startup mentality. You're very, very rarely 0.001%, I would say. I've never, I've seen it when they get to a certain size, because there's clear differentiators. A hunter in an SAP, IBM, Oracle, those doors are opened by the brand name.
By the team of people that are also selling in that account for you at that company, or the partner.
Yeah, that's very true.
Or, there's been people that I've brought in that have said, there's been a couple of times where I have brought in a person that may have had some time at Oracle or SAP or a couple at IBM. And I know two different conversations with two different AEs over the years, and they both were the similar. They said, I never thought about the people that were the first team at said company, Oracle, IBM. They're like, I never thought about who was the person that created the channel, who was the person that developed that partner that gave me that opportunity that I then was able to close and bring in revenue for that company. They're like, we never thought about that, right? And now we're in that shoes. Like, we are starting from ground zero. I always try to put people in just, I think there's three types of people that work at software companies, and there's mavericks, there's builders, and there's scalers, right? I map to the maverick and the builder. At some point, I know I'll leave pyramid when we get to a certain number of users, a certain number of customers, a certain number of people. I am not a scaler, right? And I need to leave before that happens, because I struggle in those environments. It's not fun. Other people, I'm sure, find it fun. It's just not for me.
Do you think that might be? We'll come back to that in a second. Just a slight deviant. Do you think that might be because if you don't have a problem to solve, you're not mentally engaged?
For me, yeah, it's absolutely it. Yeah, I mean, from a builder, I just enjoy fixing stuff. I enjoy creating processes, cleaning up stuff. It's trial and error. I enjoy it, right? It doesn't scare me. The people that are scalers, they want, I think, a little more comfort in their daily life than, the maverick. Like, I know the maverick. Like, look, for me, I know I'm every 90 days. For me, I'm evaluated freaking probably every 48 hours, right? For all I know. I know my length of time here is judged every 90 days. And what did Brian and what did his team produce? I like that. I'm okay with that, right? I share that with my friends that work at the larger companies, and they're like, McCormac, you are absolutely nuts. Like, you could go have a comfortable job anywhere else where, you could be successful, but that doesn't make me happy. Like, and there's less sacrifices on that side. It's very easy. It's just not me. I don't know.
I think no, I get that. I am the same. I get bored, and I'm saying this as a founder and director of a recruitment agency, so I know that probably in a year or two I'm going to be hiring an MD to take over, because my level of interest will probably go, because we'll be very, hopefully, we'll be stable, we'll have the processes. And have you ever heard, in sales you have medic? There's a book called EOS, Entrepreneur's Operating System. I don't know if you've ever heard of that concept before. So basically, there's visionaries, standout ones, Steve Jobs, for example, like visionaries. I mean, not every person's a visionary, but big ideas, big relationship, big problems. And then you've got what they call it an integrator. Someone that comes in and is the middleman and everything like that around processes, and they make everything work. That's sort of like a builder, for example. And I think that if more people were honest about what they would do around being a builder, being a scaler, being a maverick, they would get a lot more job satisfaction out of what they do, versus trying to fit a mold in. When I talk to a founder and they're like, right, we need a VP of sales because it's founder led at the moment. I'm like, well, do you actually need a VP of sales? there's like you said, Series A and B, and I know Pyramid are slightly beyond that, but technically that 2020, this 2022 funding was a Series B, in my opinion, for their product. It wasn't a Series D because it's a completely different product set. And I completely get from a mindset perspective and from a mental perspective that there comes a point when you just know, like, I'm not going to enjoy this anymore because I've done all the hard work, and so I need to look at something else. When that time comes, how do you? Because you put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into that. We've spoken multiple times around Pyramid. How do you deal with that when you're basically walking away from your baby?
But you made it. Yeah, but you made it better than what it was, right?
Okay.
When I'm at a scalar organization, you can't really say that you've had that big of an impact, right? And you can't point to it's harder to measure success when there's a great book that I'm thinking about too right now, which is Lou Holtz. He's a Notre Dame football coach, and he said his one single largest mistake was that he had the top college program for 6 years, and he never did anything else. He's like, I took it to the top, and I ran it to the top. And I think what he's saying is that he never went to the NFL, right? He never tried to get to the next step. He thought he was at the next, but he really wasn't, right? And I kind of compare that to kind of like an organization where it's been around for 10, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and it's on a pretty smooth trajectory, right? So.
Okay, I think that's an interesting. We'll come back to that, I think, a little bit later on. But so we were talking about tips for hiring managers. So you've got down here looking at the LinkedIn program, like LinkedIn activity, the recommendation from the buyer persona or from their clients, not co-workers or anyone in the revenue marketplace. Seeing if they ask questions about you, like where do you live, on that first call. Anything else from that perspective?
I mean, yeah, there's lots of things that we want them to do research on before they come to the call. But those are some of the bigger things,
So let me ask you a slightly play devil's advocate here. So every great salesperson is active on LinkedIn, posting things on LinkedIn.
I would say a great hunter.
Okay.
Is someone that is always beating the drum of their brand or their organization somewhere. May not be on LinkedIn, right? But they're doing that, and they know where their buyer is at, right? And they're doing it. They're doing it in a way that also can show me that they can get to a no very, very fast into a sales cycle or into a conversation, right? I think the best sales rep is someone that can get to a no and can say, hey, look, we had 30 minutes scheduled for this meeting. And after 12 minutes, I can kind of figure out that shouldn't we really be having conversations? If these 2 or 3 things change for you, let's have a conversation, right? About how we can actually help. It's those sort of traits.
Now.
Yeah, it's those sort of traits you can generally find about people in a public way, I would say.
Okay, no, I like that. What would you say has been your biggest regret over the last 10 years from a professional perspective?
Biggest regret. I mean, there is a lot of, sacrifices that you do have to make with the family. I don't even want to think about, maybe I think I've logged probably 200,000 air miles this year in 2022. I don't know how many countries I've been to multiple times, but it's been a lot.
To be an SVP of Global Sales, eh?
I mean, look, even as an AE back in the day, I was doing 150 nights out a year for several years, and I can't tell you how many weekends and Sundays that I was gone, to start the week in some other city. But that's the sacrifices that you have to make. But that's okay. Like, I'd rather I'd rather make those sacrifices, and for my children to know that, those are the sacrifices you have to make to be successful. Right.
I'm going to ask you a poignant question here. This is going to be, this might poke the bear per se. Is it for your children or is it for you?
It's both. Yeah, no, it's definitely both.
I get that we do it for our. I don't personally have kids, but I like to think one day I will. So I think that. But at the same time, I think when I'm honest with myself, I'm like, actually, I enjoy the money. I enjoy the impact I have. So is it more per se for your selfish desires, from a mental perspective, having that impact, being that fixer, that go-to guy, or I mean, because if you do that well, your kids will be looked after, and maybe even kids sort of generational thing. Is that more? Would you say it's more you that makes smile and accomplishes versus your family?
No, it's for me. It's something that we talked about earlier, which is from a work ethic perspective. That is a trait that you have, that you learned through osmosis or watching someone else, right? And if you have that trait, that drive, that work ethic, that'll solve a lot of other gaps that you have as a human, as you progress. I was able to learn that work ethic because my father was blue collar, and I was able to work with him as a child, right? And that was great.
Yeah.
It sucked at the time, right? But then I realized what that gave me for later. And what kind of keeps me up at night is how do I teach that to my kids, right? You really can't. I will say though, with COVID, it kind of has helped because they just thought Dad left on the plane on Sundays and came back on Fridays. They didn't realize that was involving 15-hour work days where you're in meetings from 8 a.m. until 5, and then you have a dinner with a client, and then you're on the laptop from 9:30 until 11 o'clock at night. They see that now because I'm in the house, right? Which is good generally. But no, that does keep me up at night of how can I instill that work ethic when the child's not working with me into them, so I know that they'll be successful. That does worry me. So
it's an interesting point, and one that is probably, I wouldn't say you're, let alone a father, but I think the generation coming into the workforce, as well, their hard work seems to almost break them versus make them. From personal perspective, you talk about your dad. My dad run a commercial cleaning company, so I was quite literally cleaning toilets at 9 years old. And there was some interesting things in those toilets, and you hate it, but as you grow up, that innate desire, or I think there's also a fear of being a failure as well with that. I mean, I don't know if that's something from yourself, but one of my biggest fears is failing. By my own definition of that.
Yeah.
How, out of curiosity, that they now see, not to make this a personal sort of podcast, but they now see that you're doing that. Have you noticed their behaviours changing around their work ethic from seeing dad at home doing 15-hour days per se versus previous to COVID?
I would say they're probably a little bit too young. Maybe my oldest, maybe a little bit. but it's not going to hurt. That's for sure. For them to kind of see that, witness that. But with that, there's still balance. There's still some balance given there, right? A little bit. Now that you're kind of working from home from a COVID perspective. I I hope to see that. My oldest, I will say, is showing. The kid's only 12, 13. Actually, sorry. He just turned 13. He's already a baseball umpire, and he's already doing 3 and 4 games on a Saturday, right? So he's already working 8 hours on a Saturday, right? In the summer, and 40 degrees Celsius, 100 degree Fahrenheit heat, man, with full black garb on, right? So I love to see that, right? So, and I hope the others, are following him as well. But it also could be said too, like the old Bill Gates quote, right? Of give a task to a lazy person, and he's going to figure out the easiest way to do it possible, right?
My boss used to say that to me when it came to walking.
Also, some truth in that too. But I don't know, the drive, the work ethic, that solves so many things. Just like we always say, pipeline solves so many problems in software sales too. That's the case. So.
No, I think that's a poignant thing. That sort of leads quite nicely onto the last section of this. It's been a really good conversation, and there's so much good unpacked. So I definitely would like to get you back on next year at some point. But you might I think some people would look at you and look at your career and go, do you know what? Brian is someone who is successful. If you type in on Google success, one of the things that comes up is our routines or these cold showers, 5:30 a.m. wake ups, and motivation, meditation and everything like that. Do you have a morning routine? Do you take cold showers? What's your sort of like? Is that something you have? Do you believe in something like that? I mean, I know we haven't really spoken about anything like that, but just from a mindset perspective, what do you think makes you successful outside of that drive to be successful?
Do I have a morning routine? Yes, I do. It's probably not, super exciting, but it definitely for me, I think for me, when I am traveling, one thing that I do when I am traveling is I like to have the same hotels, the same restaurants, preferably even the same floors of the same hotels, so roughly the same room. I kind of like to get into that sort of a habit, if you will. There's a hotel in Frankfurt, Germany that I've stayed in for years. I've probably only the hotel's probably 500 rooms. I think I've only stayed in 5 rooms in that hotel over the last couple of years, Luke.
Wow,
that's
why
so.
that? Why that sort of micro obsession almost?
I think it's the same as it's just a repetitive thing, right? For me, I generally wear the same clothes every day, right? I generally stay in the same hotel, in the same room every day. It's just, if all that's very simple routine for me, then I can handle the complex stuff and not have to worry about, all the other stuff, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's. I can see why. Yeah, I think I read another quote somewhere about how if you look at Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, the big titans, let's say, of the tech industry, either B2C or B2B, they always wore the same clothes. I think there was a study somewhere that I said Jeff Bezos, I can't remember his last name right, but Jeff B of Amazon said that he only makes 2 or 3, maybe 4 decisions a day.
Yeah, be high quality.
Yeah, you know, and that I can see perhaps why that I personally love going to different hotel rooms. It's a quirk of mine, but I can
Yeah.
see that I can see the repetition there of something is quite almost settling. Like you expect it, you know exactly what it's going to be like. There's nothing that's going to take that mental energy away from you.
I generally, it's as I'm thinking about too. For me, if I'm coming to London, I generally know, you know, first of all, for planes, I'm also same row. Now
I'm really tempted now, actually, just so whenever I know you're going to come, just book out, just completely book out an entire row.
Yeah. It's just it's all the stuff that doesn't matter. I just want to make it the same.
Yeah.
Like
you clearly work a lot, right? And there's mental power there. I think you and I have laughed. We're quite, we're bigger lads, bigger men.
Yeah.
Health wasn't always. How do you protect your energy? Or manage your energy so that you mentioned this repetition stuff, and that's sort of where the idea came from. As we grow older or in roles, there's more demand on us. You've got kids, the amount of hats you wear in a day, let alone just SVP of Global Sales. How do you protect your time? What sort of tips would you give to someone who maybe is in that sort of leadership role? For someone like myself, like that's learning around that. I know I've asked your advice on leadership stuff before. How do you go about managing your energy and protecting it?
For me, all of my things on my calendar align to my KPIs. If they don't align to my KPIs, I don't have it on my calendar, or if I have it on my calendar, I don't join those calls. Simple as that, right? And for me, I get pulled to a lot of things that don't necessarily drive revenue. I just don't go to them, right? And you can be really busy and accomplish nothing in a day, if you're not careful. So for me, it's and I think that just goes back to the whole scaling type company. Man, there's a lot of stuff on your calendar that's just on there for various reasons, right? And if it's not driving revenue, I'm not doing it, right? And if it's not moving a KPI, I'm not doing it, right? So consciously, everything that I accept is something that if I'm attending that meeting, it's got to drive something for me. Other thing that I hate is PowerPoints, Luke. Man, every organization has got people that can build PowerPoints beyond PowerPoints beyond PowerPoints. I could care less. Like the amount of time it takes you to build that PowerPoint is just a mind suck, right? Like PowerPoint, I think, is the death of successful meetings for the most part. I'm always about what knob are you turning today, tomorrow, the next day that you need to turn to improve some KPI, right? And I don't care what you put on a PowerPoint slide. Like that's just a horrible use of time, I think. Is all of that.
Just
So
by PowerPoint. That's been around. That's a long time debate. That is. What do you think? Actually, what's your opinion on, say, the biggest difficulty an SVP or a VP, CRO level type of person in an organization? What's the biggest difficulty that isn't really being talked about at the moment?
The biggest difficulty that's not being talked about.
Or problem that's not being talked about. No, when you've got these people posting on LinkedIn and all that stuff.
It's not being, I guess, was maybe a bit of a surprise, man. But being SVP, it's lonely, Luke. It's as an AE, as an SE, when you're traveling, man, you got five people with you, man, all the time, right? SVP level, you're traveling by yourself, man. It's lonely sometimes, for sure. It doesn't really, you got to kind of have to watch it. I think a little bit of like, for me, I read a ton, which is good, or I have audiobooks. But there's, a couple of Saturdays ago, man, I got stuck in Paris, man, for like 9 hours. Paris airport, and I'm like, man, this is just on a Saturday. I do not want to be here, right? I was flying from, I don't know from where to where, but you know, no one ever really talks about that, right? But
I think the players are so spot on because I'll be a little bit vulnerable here. That's probably been my biggest fear of doing this. I love what I do. Any lead, I don't think it definitely is not talked about. And I've looked on LinkedIn for groups. I've done post searches on it. And it's something I'm going to be really focusing on in 2023 from a personal perspective, because it is lonely at the top. That term, whether it is a leadership or whatnot, it is lonely. It is hella lonely. And do you know what? You'll be the funniest person between 9 and 5 to your subordinates because they'll laugh because they don't fear you per se, but they will laugh because you're the boss. So there is having those friends, and I think that even when you've got friends, it can still be incredibly lonely because the pressures you face, the challenges you face are very unique to your position. So how would you deal with that? When you're sitting in Paris airport, I mean, there's that term first world problems, right? Paris airport on your own on a Saturday, there could be worse places to be stuck. But from a mental capability, where does your mind go when you're sitting there thinking that? And then how do you combat that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've got a group of about 8 to 10 guys, most of which are, SVP, CRO guys that I'll reach out to on an every week basis. I'm like, hey, look, making this decision. I know you made this twice before. What'd you learn from it? What would you not do here? You've got to have, I think, a core group of people outside of your own company, but still making similar decisions as yourself, just to bounce ideas off of, I think that's a better group than someone internally oftentimes, right? Because they're going to tell you decisions that will either more than likely be a decision that will positively impact them, right?
That's interesting. And have you sort of all grown through the ranks together, or are they just people you've come across?
People I've worked with, over the years, people that we've either been, heck, one of the guys that, I was actually a customer of mine, right? And then he has been, now he's CRO of a very sizable organization, and, he's got a team of around 900 people, right? And him and I chat, once every 2 weeks, just on, usually on a Saturday morning, like early morning. We'll generally have, we just call them coffee chats or what have you.
I'm actually glad you brought it up. I think that's a very pertinent topic that a lot of people don't talk about, and on that. Okay, well, about 4 or 5 more questions. What would you say? You mentioned about your mentors, like people you that are stuck with you, or these 8 to 10 people. Has there been one particular thing that's stuck in your mind that they've mentioned to you that you think other people should know about?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's do it. The decisions you have to make oftentimes are going to affect people that you've never met before, right? And sometimes for me, that's the human side of this that no one talks about, right? The changes you have to make with people are going to affect a long string of connections that you're never going to know, right? But dealing with the people that you do know and dealing with it from a human perspective is something that people will remember you for, either whether it was positively or whether it was negatively done, right? At the end of the day, we're all freaking humans, right? Like, that to me, because I've seen it done in organizations in such a non-human way, and there's no need for that, right? When changes are having to be made, you need to do it in a way that takes the human side of it into effect. You know, you're not managing from a spreadsheet, right? And sometimes that's often forgotten, I think, especially what we're going through right now with all the various changes as you know, at multiple organizations
Yeah.
going on. So,
Well, where do you see? I mean, this question's sort of two-pronged. What do you see as the future of SaaS sales in sort of the next 5 to 10 years, but also the future of analytics in 5 to 10 years?
yeah, that's. I do think we are getting more and more back to what we were pre-COVID.
Mm.
You know, we are seeing clients more and more. There is, of course, a financial aspect of the travel, and that we used to have the benefits of, you know, having a cost of a plane and a hotel and going and seeing, you know, 4 to 5 clients in a day, right, for that expense. And now you don't have that quite yet. You know, I was out in California a few weeks ago and we actually saw 3 clients in one day. I'm like, wow, it's been a little bit of time since that was been able to be achieved in their offices, mind you, right? Like,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
of all places, California, right? So I do think we are getting a little bit back to that. Um, from an analytics perspective, right now we are, you know, the organizations are going through more infrastructure and database changes now than what they've done probably more in the last 20 years, right? That's going to affect workforces. It's going to affect where spend is at. It's going to affect technology decisions um, over the next 5 years. Again, more so than we've seen in probably the last 20. Um, you know, if I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be here, man. I'd be doing something else. That's for sure. That would be way more better. That's for sure. But it's hard to predict the future. But history does repeat itself. That's for sure. We do know that, right?
Yeah.
So this whole move to the cloud, all of that, of course, is right in front of us, happening all the time. But on the other side, I see people leaving the cloud too. A little bit, Luke. Like, I've seen some organizations that are having conversations with us trying to reduce their cloud cost because it's gotten out of hand. Right?
Yeah.
Been kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So.
On a talking about meeting clients and everything around that, the world of sales tech has exploded over the last 2 or 3 years. You've got Zoom Info, Salesloft, Outreach, Marketo back in the day, HubSpot now. There's so much sales tech out there. Yeah. Gong. You don't need to throw a stone out the window. You'll hit 10 on the way down. Whilst per se that sector or industry is likely to probably consolidate over the next couple of years, what's your, in your ask from a tactical perspective, what's your must-have sales tech, like top 3 bits that you couldn't live without?
Yeah, Gong first and foremost. Gong recording, the actual how we use Gong. Also, the intel, the analytics behind there is just invaluable, I would say. Right. That's first and foremost. Obviously, pick your CRM that, of course, you need. I mean, obviously, you need that, and then some sort of ABM strategy, right? Whether it's Sixth Sense, whether it's demand based, something like that to know what the buyer is doing when you don't have access to the buyer.
What's your go-to CRM?
I would say right now we're using HubSpot here right now. It's working for us. I've always used Salesforce in the past. I don't think it's the tech as much as it is the people that are deploying the tech, more so than the tech, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question.
There's another thing coming
actually.
out. There's another kind of area coming out that's called the conversation intelligence space, which is a new emerging sales tech. And we are beginning to kind of experiment with that a little bit with some really early stage companies around the nonverbals that are happening and the analytics behind it for people on the screen, right?
Interesting.
Yeah.
We'll do a whole other episode on that one day, I'm sure. What's something you maybe wished I asked during this podcast that I didn't? And if so, how would you answer that?
Ah, gosh, I never thought about that, man. I don't think I have an answer to that, actually.
Wow, that's a first. Well, it's.
I mean, no, I don't. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's not an issue at all. We've covered an awful lot in this podcast, in this recording. From mindset to Tel Aviv-based organizations to interview tips for both interviewees and interviewers, profiles of a good hunter to mindset to loneliness. If there is anything that you would want, even if someone was just to pick this part of the conversation to listen to, what would you hope the biggest takeaway the audience get from listening to this?
In order to be successful, I think in anything that you're doing, there's a lot of things that happens that you're doing that people just never see, right? It's the stuck in Paris on a Saturday, right? It's talking to your peer group on a Saturday morning. It's planning your weeks out on a Sunday afternoon. It's working with your team at 4:00 in the morning some days and 9:00 at night on some days. Like, there's just a lot of things I think that people just take for granted sometimes. And it's not, it's fun for me, right? It's not easy, but in order to make all those sacrifices, you've got to have a drive behind why you're making those sacrifices, or at some point you're just going to give them up. So
yeah, I think that's a nice point to end on. Very nice point to end on. And as I say, with all our listeners, if you can subscribe to us, we're on Spotify, we're on Apple Music, we're on YouTube, and this will be on LinkedIn as well. So that'd be great if you can subscribe. Any comments, any questions, more than happy to. Brian, your LinkedIn will be hyperlinked across them, so our listeners will probably give you a good eyeful, and maybe even reach out to connect. Just remember there is a fee for any introduction that is made. No, I'm only joking on that one. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me, and we've covered some pretty interesting things here and deep things. I'm sure I'd like to get you back on for that. Thanks again, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke. Appreciate it.